and stay full of positive energy,
Yeah.
like it's God's will then,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you don't win, then that's God's will. But then I believe God has something bigger for you, or he's trying to teach you something, right? And I just have always been like that.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, keeping Jesus in the sports conversation. Here's your host for today's show, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
He is Mike Furrey, the former NFL wide receiver, now the head coach at Limestone University. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding. I appreciate you having me on here, and this is going to be a lot of fun.
It is. I'm glad that we were able to connect. Your name has popped up. I can't tell you how many times, especially in the conversations I've had with Dan Orlovsky. I know you and Dan are tight, and you were an influential person on Dan's faith because every time we talk, especially when we talk about Christ and we talk about the Lord, your name pops up every time. So it feels like this was a conversation that was meant to happen, Mike.
Well, it's I was very fortunate when I got a chance to sign with the Detroit Lions and go to Detroit, and when my wife and I, Corin, we both moved there, and the first thing we did was we got involved in with Dave Wilson, who was our team chaplain in Detroit, and of course John Kitna, Josh McCown was heavily involved with Dave, and then we had this little this young quarterback, this up and coming quarterback that couldn't let go of his Connecticut days, and it was just like a wet puppy, in the league, and really trying to make it, trying to stay in and do all those kind of things. And then all of our relationships, John and I and Josh and Danny, have just formed. To this day, we have a group chat that's just us guys. And it's really neat, but it was obviously started by our faith or what we believe in. I think it grew because of the respect that we had for each other, because of the way we lived. And the coolest thing is to see Danny, watch him grow up a little bit, kind of, thinking you have a little bit of something to do with the man that he's become and him. And it's been great to watch.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. And even how you got to Detroit and got into that locker room is a fascinating story.
Remember, we don't have but more than 30 minutes.
I know. We got to get the book.
We're going to knock it out.
The Mike Furrey autobiographical, book that we need to get someday and read, because there's so much to your career. Here's what I'll ask you this, because it's not just playing with coaching. It's been really an interesting journey that's brought you to Limestone, left to go to the NFL, back to Limestone. I'm just curious, is there a word when you think about it to describe these past 3 decades of football that between playing and coaching?
I think it, in the beginning, I thought it was resilience, just a resiliency of all the trials and tribulations, which we all talk about, the biblical trials and tribulations that you got to go through in order to persevere. And to me, you become stronger and more courageous, through your experiences. But so probably my playing days, I would say the resilience, being resilient. I think as I've grown into the profession of coaching, I don't think there's really one word that would describe it. The only thing I can think about now is it all makes sense. My whole career makes sense because of what I'm doing today. What I've been through as a player all makes sense now, because I get to sit behind this desk and be able to, I get to meet with kids on a daily basis and help them through their journey, whether it's relationships or it's football or it's school or it's, family life struggles or things like that. And it's like, wow, God has put me through all those things to be able to sit here, not to tell you how I overcome them, but just to be able to sit here as a brother to you, as a father figure to you and say, listen, okay, I know it's possible to get out of that, and let's do it together, because, selfishly and quietly, I've been through all those things. And so resilient because I went through it, full circle in regards to now I know why God, I always say this, Jason, I tell people all the time, God didn't make me a football player to wear a yellow jacket. That God didn't make me a football player to make a yellow jacket, right. To wear a yellow jacket. I believe that God made me who I am and go through what I've been through because he knew I was going to be a coach and be able to impact these kids' lives and affect them and what we say all the time around here, make a difference in these kids' lives because of what I've gotten to do, and not what I've done, just what I've been through to be able to help these kids, and it's been great.
What is Mike Furrey like, the coach, on a Saturday getting ready for a game compared to Mike Furrey, the player, when he was getting ready to play on a Sunday?
There's no difference.
Same guy.
It's the same guy. I've been highly competitive my whole entire life. I've had a chip on my shoulder my whole entire life because of everybody said what I couldn't do or what I couldn't accomplish. As you and I both know, that when you live by faith, not by sight, and when you give it all to Christ and you allow His will to be done, to me, that's when I believe that all things are possible. And I'm not saying that all things are possible in regards that we get what we want. I just think it makes it where God makes all things possible, that we can go through whatever we're about to face. That's still with me. I still have a chip on my shoulder a little bit. I'm proud of our team. I just don't have to go out and execute no more and get hit and do all those kind of things. But the competitiveness, the fire, the juice, the energy, the passion to see, the passion to watch. The best way I can describe it, Jason, is my last 3 years, I knew I was going to coach. And the last 3 years when I played, I started training kids in the off season. And I had more fun and I was more passionate about those kids' success when they went to college or when they went back to high school to perform that fall, watching them gain the accolades or watching them go through what they went through or watching them succeed. I had more fun doing that than playing. And that's how I coach. And that's what I have to this day. And I'll tell you, when that leaves one day, then that's the good Lord says, time to hang up.
Yeah, that I can sense that in terms of, especially you go back to that word resilience, right? Like you said, and it's interesting to look at your journey because you walked on, I believe, at Ohio State and then transferred to Northern Iowa, and then you go undrafted. So like the resilience factor is, to the umpteenth, measure, if you will, number of you kind of overcome just to even get to the NFL. It feels like that there was so much there. The odds were stacked against you. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, it's been not to go back too far, but it's been, and I've always liked it that way, to be honest with you. I think I became comfortable with it, but, I was 4 years behind my older brother who was drafted out of high school to the major leagues, and I was always a little furry, and so I was already behind the 8 ball, and he was going to be the one that made it, and I wasn't. And then I got a chance to, my senior year was runner-up to player of the year in Ohio, to Charles Woodson, and he was going to Michigan, and I had no offers at all, and then got a chance to walk on at Ohio State and became one of the fastest guys at Ohio State. Broke the shuttle record at Ohio State, so I figured I was, would get an opportunity to get a scholarship. That didn't happen. They thought maybe I was just a hometown hero kid and would stay around a little bit longer and always grow up. That's all you wanted to do, right? Was play at Ohio State, and so why would I ever leave? But I had bigger plans and bigger goals, and I lived for a bigger person, and so I ended up leaving and went to Northern Iowa in the middle of nowhere, and was a 3-time All-American. Couldn't wait to get drafted, and then didn't get drafted, and it's just everywhere I've gone, it's been pretty cool. And even now to this day, I don't ask God. I just think it's funny. I think God's got a great sense of humor in my path. But I retired in 2010. I got an opportunity to go be a head coach at a Christian school, Kentucky Christian, down in Grayson, Kentucky. No football field, no team have won. I think they won one game in 4 years or something like that.
Wow.
And so that was the plan that God put me on. What's funny is 2 years later, a buddy of mine, Chad Pennington, who I was with the New York Jets, traveled by and went by Kentucky Christian every Saturday to the Marshall game, which was 30 minutes down the road. And so he called and was like, why don't you come to Marshall? So I went to Marshall and had a phenomenal time over there for 3 years, and we were very, very successful. And then again, good Lord had a sense of humor. A school down in South Carolina called Limestone University, who has won one game and didn't have a football field and all that kind of stuff, called and wanted to know if I wanted to be the head coach. And so it's been funny how it's all worked out. Just kind of, and I think it's just the reason. It's I don't know what it is now. I just when you. Joshua 1:9 tells you that, no matter what, God's always with you wherever you go. And if you believe in him, he's going to put you where he wants you to be by his will. And at that point in time, you got all the strength and the courage in the world to go accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I just believe that when God puts you in those moments, without trying, I think would be denying denying what he wants you to become, but when you go in with everything that you have and you overcome those situations and you just keep grinding it out, I thank God every day for who I am. And what he's made me because of what I've been through. And again, why? Because now I can impact the kids' lives. I can communicate with my kids. I can talk to our kids. I say, listen, listen, no matter what no matter what you go through in life, there's always an end, right? There's always an end, and you get to choose what that end is like. And a lot of it has to be either you're resilient or you quit, right? And I'm here because we're not quitting, and I'm going to be here because we're not quitting. And then the greatest gratification, rather it's I've been to Super Bowls, I've been to played in playoff games in the league, I've coached, whatever it is, all those things. There's nothing like watching a kid overcome some things that he didn't think he can overcome, and then all of a sudden his career takes off because he went through that moment. And to me, now you got not only a great friend for life, but you got somebody that you can trust for the rest of your life. And I think those relationships are a lot more important than jewelry and everything else that sometimes you go through.
100%. You use that word overcomer, and it made me think, okay, Northern Iowa, the Rams, Overcomer, which was a movie 2 years ago about Kurt Warner's life. And
Yeah.
your story has a little bit of Kurt Warner story in it,
Yeah.
I think. Is that something that, especially when you got to the Rams, I don't even know if you got to talk to Kurt or if he was in the Rams and you guys overlapped, but have you had conversations with him at all about like his journey and your journey a little bit, kind of paralleling itself?
Yeah, I need to write a book one day because this is obviously in the book. But so I played at Northern Iowa. Kurt was at Northern Iowa, and when I was at Northern Iowa, I was a city boy from Ohio. I was a Division I player, and I wasn't going to be hanging out with anybody else in Iowa and all that kind of stuff. But all my buddies wanted me to go down to Des Moines, Iowa, to watch this guy play arena ball because he played at Northern Iowa. His name was Kurt Warner. And I was like, you'll never see me down in an arena ever watching a football game, let alone like who in the heck's Kurt Warner. So anyways, like I'm trying to break records here, like at Northern, I'm trying to erase all their names. Like that's what my goal is. So I don't really care about going to watch Kurt. But fast forward about 3 years later, I was building houses back home. I just got cut by the Indianapolis Colts. I just got home from the XFL. I actually played in the XFL the first time around.
Yeah.
Came back from the XFL, got a phone call from a team called the New York Dragons, which was the arena team out in Long Island, who happened to be the Iowa Barnstormers. The year before that, they got bought out in Iowa and got moved to Long Island. And Kurt Warner played for the Iowa Barnstormers, and now here I am playing for the New York Dragons. And 2 years later, after I got to New York, our stats and everything that we were doing over there was pretty good. And I got a call in week 13 of my second season that a guy by the name of Kurt Warner was coming out with NBC to commentate one of our games. And I had also gotten word that one of our administration guys from the New York Dragons, who was at the Iowa Barnstormers, had also called Kurt and said, listen, I know you guys just got rid of, Ricky Prohl just went to Carolina. I got a wideout for you that you need to see. And he went to Northern Iowa. And Kurt said, I'm going to come check him out this weekend because I'm commentating the game. Kurt came and commentated the game. Kurt came down in the locker room afterwards, handed me a cell phone. It was the St. Louis Rams, and they offered me a contract right then and there with Kurt.
Wow.
And Kurt then took me out to St. Louis the next day. We went back out to St. Louis and started OTAs. And the reason why I made it and got a chance to be in the National Football League was a great friend of mine to this day is Kurt Warner. So the high V, the story and all that stuff, I tell Kurt, he actually I think it was a couple months ago, he was messing around. He said, "You see my movie yet?" I said, "Bro, I lived your movie. Like I don't need to see. I've been to the high V. I know it all, man. I played for your arena team, but so I think our stories are a little bit different, but I think there's a lot of similarities. What he had to go through, and then where he ended up with the yellow jacket. Like Kurt will tell you to this day. Like Kurt's, he'll tell you. Like coaching is not like something that he wants to do 7 days a week,
right.
But he's got the yellow jacket. Like that was God's plan for him. And that's his platform, the TV and his social media and what he can do and how he can make an impact. That was his plan. That was God's plan for him. Mine was different. Mine was to go through all those things a little bit so that I could come coach. And so I think there's a lot of similarities into the way that we got into it. But I wouldn't have got into it as I did if it wasn't for Kurt Warner, and which obviously ended up being Mike Martz and all that stuff. And they kept me around, and my 8-year career started.
That's an awesome story. I didn't know all of that. I figured there was some
Yeah,
connection with Kurt, but
there's so much more to that story I mean, there's
all right,
that
Mike. So
whole
I'm going to connect you with a literary agent when we're done, and you
yeah,
can write your
no,
book, right, man?
that whole St. Louis thing, yeah, that whole St. Louis thing I could write a book about just that scenario of there's so many things that went on and it was crazy.
Well,
But
that's why I want to remind people that 2005, you were converted to be a defensive back, had
Yeah.
4 picks, by the way, a pick 6, and really did well. And then it's the year later, you go to Detroit and you catch 96 balls and 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns.
Yeah.
That feels just like a book, like an entire book on the 05 Mike Furrey, the 06 Mike Furrey, and how God was weaving and putting all that story together, because people don't do. The person I thought of right away was like Deion Sanders was the only guy I remember who was a legit, obviously Hall of Fame defensive back. And then when he went to Dallas in, I think it was 96, they made him their second receiver, their third receiver, and he caught like 50 balls. But I haven't seen a guy make that transition in back-to-back seasons the way you were doing it.
I didn't either. And matter of fact, when Mike Martz came over to me and said, we're going to move you over to safety for OTAs, I went home. My wife said, well, we were packing our house up because he's just really nice and he loves you. And he's just trying to make it easy to tell you that you're cut. But, there was we were so stacked in St. Louis with Isaac Bruce, Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Steven Jackson, Kevin Curtis, Sean McDonald, Dane Looker, and then myself. Like, that was our offense, And and Mike loved to dress 6 wideouts. And my first year in St. Louis, Kevin Curtis and Sean McDonald got hurt. So it was just me, Dane, Isaac, and Torrey. So here I am catching 20-some balls on a team that went 12-4, and we're supposed to go to the Super Bowl until we got beat by Steve Smith on the 70-yard touchdown in double overtime.
Yeah.
Well, the next year, I was off and on the roster, up and down, because of everybody was healthy. And so, long story short, after my year 2, Mike Martz came to me and said, listen, I got an idea. If you can play safety, which I know every position at wideout, if you could play safety, then I can dress you as the 5th or 6th receiver. If we got to get you out of a game or safety out of a game, you can go over and be our 4th safety, and now you can dress every Sunday. So, and again, me now, I was like, whatever, I'm in. I don't care. Whatever I can do, I'm in. And so ended up going through OTAs that summer. And then Mike Martz came back to me before training camp, 4 weeks to go in training camp. I was 185 pounds. And Mike came to me and said, listen, if you want to make a full transition to safety, you could actually start as safety for us. And so I went home and gained about 20 pounds in 4 weeks.
Wow.
Came back to training camp. And then week 3 of that season, we had a Monday night game at Indy. Now, see, the first team when I left Northern Iowa was the Indianapolis Colts. So my first mentor was Marvin Harrison. He's the one that took me under his wing when I got to Indy, and I had played against Peyton in the Citrus Bowl when he was at Tennessee. So we had known each other a little bit, just from history, being able to talk and stuff. And so I was with Peyton, and Marvin got cut. I was the last one cut my rookie year. But then fast forward, now I'm getting ready to start on a Monday night against Marvin and Edgerrin and those guys who I was in the locker room with as a wideout, and now I'm playing safety. And the 2 of the coolest moments that I had in my career are when Peyton looked over and was like, what the heck are you doing? and then a couple years later, I was playing both ways in Cleveland. Yep. And I was playing both ways in Cleveland, and we played against the Packers at home, and I had to guard Donald Driver. And I would never forget as Aaron looked over and was, because I'd played against Aaron for probably the 5 or 6 years, St. Louis and Detroit. And he looked over and he's like, dude, Furrey, what are you doing in the slot? I'm like, listen, go somewhere else. But anyways, that was Mike's idea, to be able to dress both ways. And then he turned me in, and then I started 13 games. And, you talk about the interception that I had against the New Orleans Saints. Jim Haslam was the head coach down there, and I had picked the ball off against them. I think it was like week 12 or whatever, 13, and took it back for a touchdown. And next Monday they fired Jim Haslam, and because we beat them. And guess they fired Mike Martz after the season, and guess who they bring in as a D coordinator to St. Louis? Jim Haslam. Mm-hmm. So my wife and I woke up in the paper one day, and we had been released in the paper, and the St. Louis Dispatch. They had fired me and cut me, and
Wait, you
Never
found
told
out in the
him.
newspaper? You didn't get a call?
Found out in the newspaper.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. So it's been fun, man. It's been, and again, we just say, hey, let's pack the house up. Something's going to happen. God's got a plan.
Yeah.
But, and then Mike March gets the job in Detroit, calls me and says, how much you weigh? I said, I'm 210 pounds. I'm about to go be the best safety in the league. And he said, well, I just took the job in Detroit. Welcome to Detroit. You're going to play slot receiver. And I said, Coach, I'm 210 pounds. He said, yeah. He said, last year you gained 25 in 4 weeks. He said, now you got 4 months to lose 25. So come over here, and I want you to come over here and teach Roy Williams, Corey Bradford, Eddie Drummond, Charles Rogers, rest his soul, and Mike Williams. I want you to come over here and teach these guys my offense. And so I signed a 1-year deal and went over there. And I don't know what it is about week 2 or week 3, but Mike called me in his office week 2 or week 3 and said, you're going to start and never come off the field on offense. So best of luck to you. And ended up with 98 catches, buddy.
Yeah, 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. Like that's just, that's crazy to think about when you're, intercepting balls the year before and then gaining 1,000 yards the next year. All right, there's a game I want to go to in a second, which is particularly the Dallas Cowboys game in 06, because I brought that up to you before we started, and it just brought back memories of when I remember watching you catch a few touchdowns against the team I rooted for since I was a little kid. Before we get to that, let's stop for a minute and pause, because you've talked about the Lord. You've talked about God. Just give us a little snapshot, a little snippet of your faith journey and kind of Christ becoming real, becoming Lord, and kind of how it's been for you.
Yeah, I'll tell you, a lot of people have a moment, right, where it just clicks, right? And or a lot of times in people's lives, it's you're going through life where you realize you need help, and the only help you can get is from Him, and then you start building that relationship, and you become more at peace with yourself, and things start, it's just it's a lot more clear, right? The only thing I can really tell you is since I was 8-9 years old, I went to church every Sunday, and for some reason, every Sunday, the only thing I ever wanted to do was, grow up and stand in the pulpit and preach God's word. And and I've always had that relationship with Him. Now, I'm not saying I've always lived that right every day. That's human nature, but in the back of my mind, no matter what, or always in the front of my mind, I've always wanted to be a preacher, and I've always fought myself about going to the seminary. Even throughout my career, I wanted to go into the seminary and become, and start my own church and build a church and all those kind of things. And so that's really it. The coolest thing about success, and I believe this 100%. I think that you really maximize your success. How do I phrase it? I think you maximize your success when you take the journey by yourself, if that makes sense. I think that when you walk a journey, it can't be with 18,000 different things. It's got to be with one man. That's it. It's got to be with God, and that's it. And God tells you, and the Bible tells you that He is first. He is first. Of all things, He is first. Your wife then is first on earth, right? Yeah. But it starts with Him, and that's it. And for some reason, Jason, and thank God for this, but for some reason, I have just been truly attached to Him. I went to Ohio State literally almost by myself when I went to Northern Iowa, right? 3 years in Northern Iowa. There was nobody that went with me, and I was 10 hours away from home. I never went back home. I never went back to Columbus, Ohio. Like I went from Northern Iowa, then I was in Indy, then I was in Vegas in the XFL, and then I was in New York. And so, then it was just him and I, and I can't tell you how many times I've driven from Columbus to Iowa when I was in school. And I just put the windows down, turned the radio off, and I just felt like you just talking to God, just listening to God, just listening to my conscience, listening to what I want to do. And I was so goal driven on what I wanted to become athletically that I just felt like spiritually, I didn't want anybody to mess that up, if that makes sense. And it's kind of crazy, but I tell people all the time, success is a lonely road. It's got to be a lonely road, because if you don't listen to what God's telling you throughout that journey, you'll never be resilient, right? You'll always listen to the crowd. You'll always listen to your peers or the people that want you to fail. You won't maximize your potential.
Yeah.
And so, always wanting to be in the pulpit. I've always felt like I've had a strong relationship with God. I've always trusted God's will. I've been so fortunate for some reason in my life. I'm very, very competitive. I try to go as hard or harder than anybody else, even to this day in the weight room with my guys. When I go down and lift with my guys, like there's nobody going to outlift me. There's no going to outwork me. And the reason is because then I believe that when you do those things, and like your shirt, when you do those things and you stay positive and stay full of positive energy,
Yeah.
like it's God's will then, right? And if you don't win, then that's God's will. But then I believe God has something bigger for you, or he's trying to teach you something, right? And I just have always been like that.
So you ride solo in the sense of it's you and God, right? But then you get to Detroit, and you mentioned this earlier, and I want to bring back Dan Orlovsky and certainly talk about John Kitna, who is about as bold as a person as I've ever met. And I know John decently well in terms of just having interviewed him and know how just bold he is about his faith. He was that way when he played, and he's still that way. And then you throw Josh McCown into that mix, and you talk about Dave Wilson, who I know Dave and Ann very well. You got a pretty core group of believers there that you come into the locker room with. Yep. So this success that you're defining is solo, right? You and God. But there's a pretty good group of people. And I talked about Dan earlier. He talks about you and the impact you've had on his life. So clearly it's not just, solo, if you will, or on your own. I mean, obviously it's between you and God, but there's a community that's going on here of believers. Yeah. What was that like? Just, and knowing that there was a person like Dan, right?
Yeah.
You could pour into, that John had poured into, that so many of these guys were able to influence, and now he can do that with other people. Just go through that season a little bit from a spiritual perspective. Yeah. It sounds like something cool was really happening.
Yeah, it's funny because the only thing that I can really remember to me, John is he was like the pastor, right? So John was the pastor, Josh was like the assistant pastor, and I might have been an elder or whatever in the church, or whatever they call her. Probably whatever, usher. I was the usher, and then Danny was the guy that lights the candles, the altar boy, right? So that's kind of how it was. And so, because I was still young, and John was obviously established, Josh was a little bit more established, and Danny and I were trying to figure it out. But I've always so John, those guys, those guys reference the Bible. It's unbelievable, right? And that can make a complete difference in you. When you walk. If you talk to somebody the wrong way, John might come here a second. Why are you speaking in that way? Now, the cool thing about it was 3 years prior to that, when I got to Detroit, I had a guy that took me under his wing that didn't talk to anybody, and everybody thought he was the most arrogant person in the world. But he lived a lonely journey with God to maximize his potential because he wanted to be a Hall of Famer. Well, that's Isaac Bruce.
Yeah.
So Ike is just like John. So I'd be in the hot tub, go in the hot tub and whatever, and then say something to Isaac, about, hey, what about this route or something like that? Isaac's be like, why do you use that language? You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I'm not talking about the language. I'm talking about the route. So I've been fortunate enough to have like Isaac, Kurt, John, right, and Josh, those guys, kind of the vocal guys, right? The vocal guys. They're very passionate about the word. They can speak the word very well. They live the word because they live what they speak, right? I'm a little bit different, and I think Danny is the same way also. When you're around Danny and I, John and them are they're very passionate about life as well. But Danny and I are more of just live it, right? We're more about just live it, right? And so I tell people all the time, the greatest compliment that I could ever have as a Christian is for somebody to come up to me and say, why do you live like that? Right. Why do you act like that? Where's that energy come from? Like, how do you work like that? Right? How do you not stop? Like, do you ever get tired? And then that's my opening of like, no, I don't. And then they say, well, why? And I said, well, because I believe in Jesus Christ, and I believe that the same power that raised him from the dead is in me.
Yeah.
And that's how I live. And so we're all different, right? But to have that community, to be able to sit back and watch those guys go be, like the disciples, right? Let them go be the ones that stand up and be the disciples is great to have around, because you heard the word over and over outside of reading it, right? But I was a little bit different in the way that I was just going to maximize my effort and lay it all out on the line, and then whatever God's will would be is going to be God's will. But it is obviously great to have that core right around you. And again, we still talk, like you said, we talk probably once or twice a week in that group chat with Dave and Josh and John and Danny. But I think that the coolest thing about having that core, right? And I think this is really cool, is it was awesome to watch other players watch us. Watch the core, watch how John acted, right? Watch how John treated people, or watch how we did stuff. Because if we didn't do it, right? If we didn't do it the way the Bible tells you to do it, then somebody said something. But then to us, that was, well, we got your attention, right? Because you're curious about how we live,
right?
But you're also holding us accountable because of how we live. And I don't think you get that when you're by yourself, right? But when you have a core of guys that walk around the locker room like that, you got more guys that have joined, but you also have more guys that are curious about that faith, that want to jump into the faith. Like, they know it's faith. It's just not cool to live that faith, right? Yeah. And maybe it's because they don't want to speak like John and those guys speak when they talk about the Bible. Like, we get that. But why don't you live it, And I think that was just an open door for us to be able to communicate it. And I don't think that's there unless it's a group, a core group of guys that people watch. And I think that was the coolest thing about our locker room.
Yeah, an amazing locker room. I've heard stories. I mean, even when Dan, prayed on ESPN earlier this year when the DeMar Hamlin thing happened, and watching and talking to Dave a little bit. And I think Dave had John on and Josh on, maybe with Dan or something, where they were all connected. And it was just really cool to know that, like, this is 17 years ago now. And it's still a core group of people that were influencing each other and impacting each other, that you guys built something really special there, which was awesome. Kind of awesome to see.
It was pretty cool. But John was Dave and John, they steered that thing. It was awesome. I don't, I'm just lucky. And I don't, luck is, I hate to use the word luck, right? Because it's all planned, but I'm just so fortunate, because everywhere I went, it wasn't about playing ball. It was to play ball with everything I had, but the people that I met, right? And rather it was, when I went to Arena, it was a guy by the name of Todd Doxson, who my mom told me to look up because he was a pastor from Nebraska. I was trying to take his job.
Wow.
I was trying to take his job, but he became a mentor of mine when I was in New York, and I still to this day, him and Nagy and I are connected from Arena Ball. When I go to the St. Louis Rams, Isaac and Kurt. When you go to the Detroit Lions, Kitten and McCown, Dave Wilson. So it's just, I'm just so humbled to look back and say that my mentors, right? My mentors, everywhere I went, there was God. God had a plan for me to be to be mentored by somebody. And I believe it's for this moment now to be sitting at this desk to be able to help kids and provide them an opportunity to become successful, not just obviously football wise, but with life.
Yeah.
And to get to that moment.
So as we wind down, I mentioned this story of this Cowboys game. So I saw Mike Furrey and I'm thinking, okay, 2006, I think it was Dallas's last game. They'd already clinched the playoff spot, but I think their playoff seeding might've been a little different. Ultimately, that was the year they ended up going to Seattle, and Tony Romo's first year starting, and he muffs the hand. Cowboy fans don't need to relive that moment. But there was a game before that when they were playing Detroit at home, and everybody thought Dallas was going to roll, because I don't think you guys were going into the playoffs and had a whole bunch to play for, but you rolled them. I think you had 38 points or 39 points against Dallas that year, and you had a big game. I know you at least had a big catch in that game. And I brought the game up to you before we started, and you said, "Oh, do I have a story about that game?" So here's the floor, Mike Furrey, to share your story about that game.
It's going to take longer than that, but the Dallas game was pretty neat. From what I remember, to make sure correctly, if Dallas beat us, I believe that they had home field all the way through. We were not going to the playoffs. If we beat Dallas, then Dallas ended up being a certain seed where they had to go on the road to get to where they needed to get to. And so, about 3 or 4 weeks before that, I was standing at practice, and I took a knee at practice and was waiting to go into the huddle, and Mike March came over to me and said, "How many catches do you have?" And I said, "I have no idea." And the offensive assistant at that time, his name was Adam Gase. So, which is crazy. It just blows my mind. But Adam Gase was the offensive assistant then at the time, and so Adam said he's got 68, and I was like, "Mike, you know me, like I don't know." And Adam's like, "No, he's got 68." And I said, "All right, I got 68." And Mike said, "You better buckle." He always said, "Buckle up, buddy." And he said, "You better buckle up." And I said, "What do I need to buckle up for?" He said, "You're going to have 100 before we're done." And so I was like, whatever. So anyways, we go down to Dallas.
Yeah.
And, before the season, I had signed a 1-year deal with Detroit. And so I was going to be a free agent after the season. And when you got 88 catches going into the last season, that's a pretty good year. And the coolest thing about the whole ordeal, the coolest thing about the whole ordeal in the history of the Detroit Lions, not a lot of 1,000-yard receivers, right?
That's right. Yes.
In the history of the Detroit Lions, respectively. But one of the coolest things is there's only been like 2 or 3 tandems, I believe, that have ever caught 1,000 in the same season. And Roy Williams at that time, it was awesome. It was awesome to see. I was so proud of him because of where he came from when we got there to where he ended up. Getting to his first Pro Bowl was outstanding. Even though it doesn't matter. Like, even though I was doing what I was doing, to watch Roy do what he did, and it was awesome to be able to be.
And the young people listening, this is before Calvin Johnson got to Detroit.
This was the year before DJ. Yeah,
and then Calvin broke every record there was, but that's another story for
yeah. But and I was there. I took a knee when I shouldn't say we, but when Roy named Megatron. But anyways, so we're going into the Dallas game, and I had 88, and Roy had 1,000 yards, and I think I was like 60 yards short of 1,000, but I was 12 catches short of 100, and going down into Dallas. And I wasn't thinking I was going to get 12 catches, but the good Lord's got a sense of humor. But
you got 10 though.
Yeah. So we got on the plane, and I was playing cards with Danny. It's funny. This blows your mind, but Danny was sitting next to me in my seat. Josh was behind me, and Kitna was diagonal behind me. So Danny and I were together, and then Josh and John were behind us, and we played cards. We played spades all the way down on road games. And next to John sat Dan Campbell. So it's funniest thing in the world. But anyways,
current coach of the Lions, by the way. Current.
Yeah, but so we're taking off. So we're literally taking off, and we're not even to where the bell rings yet. And Matt Millen comes over and grabs me, and he says, "Let me talk to you. Come back to the back of the plane. Let me talk to you."
Oh boy!
And at that time, I knew we had already started the contract negotiations, but I've never done this before. But anyway, so Matt turns around, and Kitna, Dan, and Josh both grabbed me at the same time and was like, "Do not agree to anything. Play ball tomorrow." So I literally, Jason, I get up and I go to the back of the plane, and I do not sit back down until we're landing.
Wow.
In Dallas. So the 2-hour flight, back in the back, talking about what could have happened tomorrow, or all the negotiating tactics, right? Which was pretty cool for me to go through. But my core guys and my wife, and that was it. We were past it. We were just going to let the good Lord take care of what happened. Play the game, and then let the good Lord take care of what needed to be taken care of, and put it in His hands. And we were at peace of that. And I didn't even think about the catches I did think about the 1,000 yards. I thought it would be cool. And then when I came over to the sideline one time during the Dallas game, Kit came over and said, "Hey, you're 8 yards short of the 1,000 yards." And we actually went back out the next series, and I caught not to get crazy emotional, but who would ever thought a kid from Hilliard, Ohio, that all those resilient deals that I had to go through, that I caught a 5 yard crossing route, and all of a sudden I get up, get forward for about 8 yards, get downfield for about 8 yards, and about a 13 or 14 yard gain. And all of a sudden I knew I had 1,000 yards in the National Football League. So,
Wow.
it's just, you want to talk about God moment, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way that could happen. There's just no way that could happen. And but anyways, so end up I don't know, the touchdown that you're talking about, the infamous thing that everybody always talks about in Dallas. I caught a touchdown in Dallas and ran down the field, ran down the end line, and I threw the ball. There were so many teams that told me no, that my touchdown celebration that year became, and it started in St. Louis, where I would find the emblem of the team on the wall, and then I would just fire a fastball after I scored at the logo. And
Yeah.
I did not know that
some other guys did that too. Yeah.
Yeah. I did not know that Dallas had stars that were hanging up on the wall that actually came off the wall. So I actually threw the ball, and I threw it and just spun around. And I didn't even know the star fell. But anyways, I went back to the sideline, and Danny and John came and got me. And they were like, "Dude, that was awesome." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They said that you knocked the star off the wall. And so here I am thinking I'm on top of the world and all that stuff. And
Wow.
so we end up leaving the game. And as I was walking out of the tunnel of the game, one of the top agents in the entire NFL business was waiting for me in the tunnel. And one of the top guy. And I just was overwhelmed by so many things of again, this is how God can work, right? I'm not saying that this is going to happen to everybody, but you got to find out why God's putting you through what you're putting you through, and it's going to be to help someone else. But just to be able to go through all that stuff, and then the whole negotiating all the way home, on the flight home to Detroit from Dallas, and then I got home, and my wife said that, well, you got humbled. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, they interviewed Terrell Owens after the game down there in Dallas, and they said, hey, when you were a visitor here with the Eagles, you went out and danced on the star, and everybody thought everything in the world about it. And they said, well, what do you think about that celebration by Mike Furrey over there that knocked the star off the wall? And I said, well, how cool is that? And she said, yeah, Terrell Owens said, I don't even know who Mike Furrey is. I said, well, we're back to earth now. So,
Yeah. And by the way, after that game, he knew who you were. Let's put it that
way.
But
it was, but again, I think that was just to me, and I still feel like this, and I felt like this the whole time, even before the catches. God has continued to prepare me and give me and allow me to succeed in areas to be able to have a platform so people would listen, right? And I think that's all that was, everything. Rather it's it's funny because I just went, Detroit Lions, and Allen Robinson, in his second year, we were trying to get him to 100 catches. His second year, it's never been done,
Chicago,
once or twice in the history of Chicago Bears. And guess what he lands on in year 2? 98. So him and I, but it was that be able to talk, we could talk about it. And, I wanted him to get to 100. So it just, just funny to look back now and say, man, you gave me this 1,000 yards so that I could have a platform, or the 98 catches, or to play both ways, or to do all those kind of things.
That's
so
cool.
that I can, I got the helmets here, I got the Browns helmet, the Lions helmet, and people said Rams helmet that I wore. And it's like, why do you have that in your office? I said, well, it's because it allows people to open up a conversation. Right. And that's how I can start reaching into them from a biblical standpoint of, this is why we do stuff here the way we do it. And I'm proud to see Dan Orlovsky and those guys doing what they're doing. And all of us are still doing it to this day.
Yeah. What a great story. I'm glad we can wind down the conversation with that. I mean, we got to get the book going, Mike. We just got to get it going here because I can't imagine all the stories that you have that you didn't share on today's show. But we're going to wish you the best of luck. Certainly Limestone University, a D2 school down in South Carolina. Big season coming up here, so we're excited for you for that. And we're just grateful that you came on the show and shared your story. Great to connect with you, and thanks for joining us, man.
I appreciate it. And I can't thank you enough. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for watching today on Sports Spectrum. Make sure you click that subscribe button so you don't miss any other videos. And if you want more stories on sports and faith, check out our website, sportsspectrum.com.